I think the biggest benefit that the European Union has brought to ordinary Europeans is a sense of stability, a sense that not only are they enjoying peace for the longest recorded period for many, many centuries in Europe, thanks to the existence of this interlocking union that makes war in Europe impossible, but also a legal order has been created encompassing 27 countries, whereby each member state has to live up to common standards of access to the law, protection of human rights, freedom of movement for people and goods within the 500 million population 27 member state union. This has given tremendous opportunity but also tremendous security to Europeans, something they didn't enjoy in previous generations. Well, integrating new member states is a process. Obviously, every new membership required adjustment, because when a country joins the European Union, not only do they have to introduce into their law up to 100,000 pages of European legislation, which is uniformly applied throughout the European Union and is what makes the European Union a union, but also they have to get used to competing with other countries, opening up their markets, no longer having national monopolies, no longer protecting particular sectors of their economy from competition. And obviously that process involves, for some people, change, and change can often be painful. On the other hand, it involves as well, the more the European Union becomes bigger, you need a bigger table for the discussions, where originally there were just 6 ministers sitting around a table when the Council of Ministers of the European Common Market met. There are now 27, and getting agreements, even getting majorities on difficult topics, becomes progressively more challenging the larger the number of members that are at the table. On the other hand, that can be coped with if you have a strong European Commission, which is the body that has the job of proposing all the legislation. Unlike the United States, where legislation is proposed by individual members of Congress or by the administration, in Europe all legislation is proposed by one body, the European Commission. It then goes through, like the United States, 2 houses of Congress, so to speak, the Council of Ministers representing the states, and the European Parliament, which is directly elected, representing the people directly. And the legislation must be passed by both of those, just as legislation here in the United States has to be agreed by both the Senate and the House, and ultimately signed by the President if it's to come into effect. I believe that the proposal, which has now been agreed as European Union policy by all of the heads of government, of President Sarkozy, of essentially stopping calling this document a constitution, which was unduly grandiose for what it was. It was really a consolidating treaty, bringing together in one document and simplifying our existing procedures and rules. And I think it's better to present that as an ordinary treaty, with some of the less of the trappings of a constitution, and to deal with it as it will be dealt with in most countries now by the elected representatives of the people in the national parliaments ratifying on behalf of the people that treaty, rather than going through a process of referenda or plebiscites, which are very unpredictable and frequently are the subject of discussions that have nothing to do with the actual issue before the people. The European Union is a union whereby everybody is free to live and work in any other state of the European Union. And if you consider what we've done in the last number of years, we've expanded our population from 350 million people and 15 states to 500 million and 27 states. And in virtually all of the new members coming in, the population's income was about 1/3 or less what the income was of the people already in membership. In a way, what we've done in Europe is like what the United States and Mexico would have done if they had merged and become, a greater United States of North America with 82 states rather than just 50 states, and with every Mexican free to work anywhere they wanted in the United States, and every American free to work anywhere they wanted in Mexico. We've created that sort of a situation in Central, Eastern and Western Europe in the last few years. And we now have, for example, in the country I come from, in Ireland, very large numbers of people from Poland, from Lithuania and Latvia working in various businesses in Ireland. You have lots of investment from Britain and from Ireland and France in Poland and those countries. So there's a mixing together of Europeans, which is tremendously energetic, and it gives a terrific boost to our economy and increases our efficiency. There is also an issue of immigration, which you've raised, from outside the European Union, from North Africa. This is a bit more difficult in the sense that the people coming from those countries, initially at least, don't identify themselves as European, whereas Poles and Lithuanians, Spaniards and Portuguese all feel they have this common European identity, but people coming from North Africa don't feel that. So integrating them is a big challenge, and it's sometimes a challenge that has to take place over more than one generation. It's not just sufficient for the initial immigrant to settle in. His children or her children must also feel fully accepted in the society. And some of the difficulties that have been encountered, interestingly enough, with second-generation young people, and sometimes even second-generation people where one of their parents was from, say, North Africa or somewhere like that, and the other parent was actually a native of France or Germany. There are many difficulties here of identity. Who am I? Where do I belong? What's my culture? And if people don't have satisfactory answers to those questions in their own minds, sometimes their frustration or their can come out in antisocial ways. So it's very important to build an identity in people's minds of Europe which is attractive to all Europe's people, whether those who originate exclusively in Europe itself or those who've more recently come into Europe. And that challenge of building an identity that people feel comfortable with is something that is very much on our agenda, and it's an ongoing one. I think there are two areas where we're particularly expanding at the moment. One is in the area of criminal and civil law, and in particular law dealing with terrorism and detecting people who might commit terrorist crimes before they commit the crimes. That is something that requires very intense cooperation between European police forces internally in Europe and across the Atlantic as well. And that's an area of very rapid expansion in EU competence at the moment. And one of the things that the new treaty would do is give more opportunity for majority voting in that area so that we can move more quickly still. Another area where we have a lot of work to do is in the area of devising a common foreign policy. Now, unlike most areas of EU decision-making, where we can make decisions by a majority or a large majority vote, in the area of foreign policy, there must be unanimous agreement for any European foreign policy to be decided upon. And that can be obviously quite difficult, where you have to get 27 countries to agree, some of whom have different political traditions. But we're working very hard on it. We're working very hard in particular in the area of the Middle East. We're working very hard in the area of development assistance, helping poorer countries to develop. The biggest donor of development assistance in the entire world to the poorer parts of the world is the European Union. Well, I think it's an issue that needs to be addressed by educating the public as to the necessity for peacekeeping and peace maintenance operations in particular parts of the world. Sometimes the public don't see the threat that emanates from very far away. But we're increasingly seeing that, for example, some of the people who are engaging directly in terrorist attempts in Europe have been trained in camps for the training of terrorists on the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, in an area where no law or order seems to apply. So by sending troops to Afghanistan who may be helping to ensure that those camps are closed down, Europeans are protecting their own homeland. But that's a connection that requires to be explained to people, and it's not always self-evident. And one has to do so responsibly. One cannot do so in a way that justifies any intervention at all in other countries. We don't have a right to intervene in other countries unless there is a very, very good reason. I think it all depends on what leadership the United States is giving and in what direction as to whether Europeans will accept it or not. Americans themselves sometimes question their own leadership as to the direction that it is going in, and I think Europeans are no different. We, of course, recognise that as the major military power in the world, the United States has a vital role to play. They are the ultimate guarantor of all of our security in Western Europe. But Europeans sometimes feel that the United States may engage in military activities that are not sufficiently well planned or should not have taken place at all. And when that happens, obviously, that has a negative effect on Europeans' willingness to accept US leadership on other issues. But there are areas in particular where I think Europeans are anxious to see US leadership at the moment, and one of those is in the case of Israel and Palestine, where we have Israel feeling very insecure and some terrorist attacks being made on them, but equally we have Palestinians living in truly dreadful conditions where people cannot make a living, where unemployment is in some places almost 100%, where people are unwilling, Palestinians are unwilling to even plant their crops because they don't know that they will be able to sell them next year because of barriers that are being imposed in the interests of Israel's security, which might prevent their crops ever getting to market and leave them rotting in the field instead. And where Palestinians can't go to work or have to go to work by very long and circuitous routes, which absorb all of their day, again because of security arrangements that Israel has put in place from the point of view of Israel's own security. So a settlement of this dispute, which would remove the necessity for these security measures, would allow both communities to breathe, is a matter of enormous priority to Europeans. And we are convinced that that can only happen, in fact, with US leadership. It's only if the United States sets forth its own policy as to what it thinks would be the configuration of two states living together, an Israeli state and a Palestinian state. I think the United States needs to have its own opinion as to what the boundaries of the two states should be, and needs to show to both parties that it is willing to be proactive in promoting that policy. I do not believe that Europeans would be happy for this situation in the Middle East to continue to drift. We must recognise that right back to the foundation of Israel, Israel's right to exist was agreed by the United Nations in 1948, and it has been UN policy that Israel has a right to exist right since that date. But at that time in 1948, a similar decision was taken that there was a right to exist of a Palestinian state. Well, the Palestinian state has not come into being. The Israeli state is in being. We need to ensure that both states are given secure boundaries, are given an arrangement that enables them to breed and live. And that's an area where I think many Europeans would like to see United States leadership and would respect and would follow US leadership. Well, I think one of the things we know from Russian history is that Russia does not ever like to be taken for granted. It regards itself as a great country, a great European country, but also a great Asian country. It straddles the two continents. It doesn't ever want to see other people telling it what to do or using Russia as a make-weight in any particular arrangement. It wants to make its own decisions as a proud country with a proud history. There was a period in the immediate aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union and in some of the chaos that flowed from that, where Russians lost self-esteem to some degree. They also lost much of what it was the original Russian Empire, which regained its independence, and that had a negative effect on Russian self-perceptions. That's now changing radically. Russia now is obviously very much empowered by the fact that energy prices are so much higher than they were, making Russian energy supplies much more valuable. And Russia is determined to assert itself. And that's entirely natural. But obviously it's important that it should do so in a way, number one, that is respectful of long-term agreements and creates stability for its neighbours. Number two, that is respectful of the sovereignty of other nations, including its immediate neighbours. It doesn't have any special rights over any independent countries that now exist in what was formerly its empire. These are now independent countries, and Russia needs to respect their freedom to go their own way. And it is important also that Russia should strike out an appropriate balance between security and freedom. Certainly Russians want security, and President Putin is giving many Russians a level of security that they hadn't in the past. But Russians also need and will demand freedom. And striking that balance is something that it's important that Russia do in its own way, but in a realistic way, because people will not, I think, having enjoyed the possibility of freedom, accept the diminution of freedom on a long-term basis, even in order to obtain greater security. Well, the European Union has engagement with China on a number of fronts. We're very interested obviously, in developing a close trading relationship with China. We import very large amounts of Chinese goods. We import a lot more from them than we export to them, and we need to do more in the export field. Secondly, we have a very important energy relationship with China. China is a big consumer of energy and will be an ever bigger consumer of energy in the future. And we need to ensure that we don't find ourselves that we compete with China for resources, but compete in a way that is purely driven by who can pay the appropriate price, that there's no attempt to skew the market in any way through any pressures that are inappropriate. And we need also to ensure that goods coming from China are safe, that the Chinese market is a genuinely competitive market, and that there isn't subsidization of Chinese exports either through currency manipulation or through more direct subsidization, so that our producers are competing on a level playing field with Chinese producers, with similar environmental and other standards being applied in every case. So those are the issues that are being dealt with in the relationship between China and the European Union. It's very similar, I think, to the agenda that is in the dialogue between the United States and China.
And how might the EU-China relationship in terms of trade impact EU-US trade relations?
I don't think that there will be any impact of a negative kind from our relationship with China on the United States' relationship with China. We, the United States and the European Union, have pretty much the same agenda. We want intellectual property protection, safety for our goods. We want a more balanced trading relationship. We want to ensure that energy supplies are not unduly disrupted by anything China might do, or that we might do for that matter. So we have a very similar agenda, and I think we need to concert with one another in the messages we give to China. I don't think that there's any potential problem there as such.